With Hobbes, the idea of natural right ceases to be anchored in the good. It becomes anchored instead in the fear of death. What is right by nature is not what people happen to believe or prefer. It is what reason, when rightly used, discovers to be proper for man, not as a citizen of a given regime, but as a human being.
Welcome to Bookscape Epic Reads, where we dive deep into the world of popular books, exploring timeless classics and modern bestsellers alike. Join us for in-depth reviews, insightful discussions, reflections. Let roll.
What is right by nature is not what people happen to believe or prefer. It is what reason, when rightly used, discovers to be proper for man, not as a citizen of a given regime, but as a human being. In Part 2 of Natural Right and History, Leo Strauss takes us into the philosophical heart of his project, the recovery of the classical view of natural right. In doing so, he guides us back to a tradition that once saw reason and nature as the twin pillars of justice, a tradition that grounded political life not in will, history, or power, but in the enduring structure of human nature itself. To grasp the classical view, we must first step into the world of Plato and Aristotle, where philosophy is not a private opinion, but a public and transformative act, one that seeks the good not just for the individual, but for the community, and ultimately for humanity. The ancients believed that human beings have a specific nature, not just biologically, but morally and rationally. We are not blank slates or infinitely malleable creatures. Instead, we are beings endowed with logos, the capacity for speech and reason. This capacity is not just a tool for survival, it defines who we are. It allows us to distinguish between right and wrong, to deliberate about justice, and to pursue the good life. It is from this essential nature that the idea of natural right emerges. The teleological worldview. The classical world saw nature not as inert matter or neutral mechanism, but as a purposeful order, a hierarchy of beings, each with its own end, or telos. Just as the eye exists for seeing and the acorn for becoming an oak, so too do human beings exist for the exercise of reason and the cultivation of virtue. In this teleological framework, justice is not an invention, but a discovery. It is found by aligning our actions with our natural purpose. Plato explores this in his Republic, where justice is defined not merely as obeying laws or keeping contracts, but as harmony within the soul and the city, each part performing its natural role, governed by reason. The just man is not just a law-abiding citizen. He is one whose desires are ordered, whose spirit supports virtue, and whose reason rules. Aristotle develops this further in the Nicomachean Ethics and Politics. He sees the city not as a construct for mutual protection, but as the natural environment in which humans achieve eudaimonia, flourishing. Politics is not primarily about security or power, but about moral education, about cultivating the habits and institutions that allow people to live well together. The good city educates citizens in virtue, because human beings can only become fully human within a just community. For Aristotle, natural right exists within the broader framework of natural law. There are certain things that are right by nature, regardless of place or time. For example, honoring one's parents or telling the truth may not always be codified into law, but they reflect enduring moral truths. These are not reducible to custom or consensus. They are known through practical reason, through judgment, informed by experience, deliberation, and moral insight. Right by nature versus right by convention. Strauss emphasizes that the classical view of natural right is not naive or rigid. It does not assume that natural right is always obvious or easily applied. Indeed, the classical thinkers recognize that what is right by nature may differ in application across times and regimes, but not in principle. Justice is not relative, it is contextual. This subtle but vital distinction sets the classical view apart from both modern relativism and dogmatic moralism. For instance, Aristotle distinguishes between natural justice and legal or conventional justice. The former is grounded in human nature and universal reason. The latter arises from the particular needs of communities. But legal justice must always be measured against the standard of natural justice. Laws can be unjust. Tyranny is legal, but not just, and it is the task of philosophy to critique the laws in light of what is right by nature. This brings us to the political significance of the classical view. It does not reduce politics to ideology or power struggles. Instead, it elevates politics to a moral enterprise, one that must constantly be informed by philosophical reflection on the nature of man and the good. The city and the soul are analogues. Just as the soul must be rightly ordered, so too must the city. And philosophy, far from being abstract or aloof, is the only activity capable of grounding politics in truth. Why it matters. In returning to the classical view, Strauss is not engaged in historical nostalgia. He is not asking us to become Greeks or to return to pre-modern societies. Rather, he is asking us to reconsider a fundamental question. Is justice real? Is there something that is right, not because we say it is, or because history has made it so, but because it conforms to our nature as rational beings? If the answer is yes, then political life is not simply the management of interests or the enforcement of procedures. It is a pursuit of the good, a domain where reason must be sovereign, and where human beings can fulfill their nature through the practice of virtue and the seeking of truth. Strauss's recovery of the classical view is thus an invitation, not to reject modernity outright, but to reawaken the question that modernity has obscured. The question of what is right by nature, not just for this time or that place, but for all human beings, insofar as they are human. And so, in a world increasingly confused about the meaning of justice, Strauss points us back to the beginning, not to escape the present, but to find in the past the resources for renewal. With Hobbes, the idea of natural right ceases to be anchored in the good. It becomes anchored instead in the fear of death. In Part 3 of Natural Right and History, Leo Strauss brings us to a critical turning point in the history of political philosophy, a moment of profound rupture. The classical world, built on the assumption that reason can discern what is good, by nature, gives way to the modern world, where the very idea of the good is replaced by the idea of the safe, and the pursuit of truth is exchanged for the management of fear. This break is embodied most clearly in the figure of Thomas Hobbes, the English philosopher who reimagined politics not as a means of cultivating virtue, but as a mechanism for preserving life. According to Strauss, Hobbes represents the decisive shift from the classical view of natural right to what he calls the modern project, a project defined not by the elevation of the soul, but by the securing of the body. The philosophical foundations. A new anthropology. At the heart of Hobbes's thought is a radically new understanding of human nature. Gone is Aristotle's vision of man as a rational political animal directed toward the good. In its place stands a vision of man as a creature of appetite and aversion, governed by fear, driven by self-preservation. For Hobbes, human beings are not naturally social. They are naturally solitary, suspicious, and competitive. Without a strong, external authority, they fall into a state of nature that is nothing less than a state of war, not necessarily of actual fighting, but of the constant possibility of violence, which generates insecurity and fear. In this bleak pre-political condition, every individual has a right of nature, not to justice or virtue, but to everything, even to another's life, if that is what self-preservation requires. In this framework, natural right is no longer moral, but purely pragmatic. It is the liberty each person has to do whatever is necessary to survive. The birth of the state, fear, and consent. The only way out of this condition, Hobbes argues, is for individuals to relinquish their rights, to surrender their natural liberty to a sovereign power in exchange for peace and security. The state is not formed to pursue virtue or the common good. It is formed to escape fear. It is, in essence, an artificial construct, what Hobbes calls the Leviathan, a mortal god created by human artifice to protect human life. Here we witness the inversion of classical political philosophy. In the ancient view, law and politics aimed at the cultivation of the good life. In Hobbes's modern view, they aim at the prevention of the bad life, especially violent death. The purpose of law is not to make men virtuous, but to keep them alive. The moral order is replaced by a legal order, and justice becomes simply obedience to law, whatever law the sovereign lays down. The new science of politics. This shift is not merely philosophical, it is scientific. Hobbes views his work as part of the new science of the 17th century, which sought to explain the world not through final causes or moral purposes, but through efficient causes and mathematical reasoning. Just as Galileo sought to understand motion through laws of physics, Hobbes sought to understand political life through laws of mechanics. Human beings, in this model, are bodies in motion, responding to stimuli, calculating advantage, and avoiding harm. The political realm becomes an extension of physics, not ethics. The sovereign is an engineer of society, not a moral guide. The goal is not the good, but the rational control of human behavior. Politics becomes a technology, a technique for managing conflict through coercion and consent. Strauss warns that this transformation has enormous consequences. By rejecting the classical idea that the political order should reflect the moral order, modernity severs politics from ethics. The result is not neutrality, but nihilism in disguise, a political order that cannot speak meaningfully about justice, except as a matter of will or power. Hobbes thus lays the groundwork not only for liberalism, but for the modern crisis of value. Critique and implications. Strauss does not deny the brilliance of Hobbes's system. It is internally coherent, modern, and in many ways, prophetic. But he insists that it comes at a high price. By defining natural right as the right to self-preservation, Hobbes empties the concept of any normative content. There is no longer any standard of right rooted in the nature of things, only a standard rooted in desire and fear. This, Strauss argues, is the beginning of the subjectivization of value. If natural right means only what each individual considers necessary for survival, then there is no common standard, no shared good. Political philosophy becomes impossible because it no longer seeks to know what is just or right by nature. It only seeks to analyze power and preference. In this sense, Hobbes does not merely break from classical thought, he redefines philosophy itself. He rejects the Socratic idea that the examined life is the highest life and replaces it with the unexamined desire for security. The political philosopher becomes not a seeker of the good, but a technician of peace. The modern project begins. Thus, in Strauss's telling, the modern break begins with Hobbes, not just in terms of ideas, but in terms of the deepest orientation of the human soul, from the love of wisdom to the fear of death, from the search for truth to the engineering of consent, from the city as a moral teacher to the state as a security apparatus. And yet Strauss does not call for a return to a mythical past. He calls instead for a recovery of the question, what is right by nature? What should politics aim at? Can we, once again, speak meaningfully of justice, not as a product of fear, but as a response to the best within us? In recovering the classical tradition, Strauss challenges us not to abandon modernity, but to confront it, to trace its origins, understand its motives and measure its promises against its failures. Hobbes's new science of politics gave us stability, but at the cost of moral clarity. It gave us peace, but only by reducing the political to the mechanical. The question that remains is whether that trade was worth it, and whether we, in our time, have the courage to seek again the truth about justice, even if it costs us the comfort of our modern certainties.